Bem-vindos, estou aqui com o Michael Roberts, economista, creio, é um dos economistas mais interessantes que eu li nas últimas décadas e sem dúvida o seu livro, A Longa Depressão, tornou-se um livro, um manual para mim absolutamente fundamental. É autor do bloco The Next Recession. Michael, thank you so much for being here. In my kitchen this time.
Well, this is a different way of discussing economics.
I have some tasks for you. Are you prepared for this? Yes, this is home economics. There will be a next recession because your blog is the next recession. When is the next recession?
Yes, I call the name of on the website for the blog is the next recession, wordpress.com, because I think that the modern economies, capitalism, have regular recessions, and it hasn't gone away. Nobody's been able to solve this. We're going to have continual booms and slumps until the capitalist system changes. So we had one 6 or 7 years ago. We're due for another one in the next 2 or 3 years.
But Keynesian economists, they keep saying that if you raise salaries and consumption, you will end with this crisis and with concentration of capital and on pauperization and.
Well, the Keynesian economists say that the reason we have these crashes and slumps occasionally is there's a lack of demand. Part of the argument will be that workers aren't getting enough wages, or the controllers of government are actually cutting spending. If they reversed that policy and started spending more, then that would solve the problems for capitalism.
And what do you think about this? By the way, I have a task for you while we will explain us why this is not convincing. Would you be able to divide this?
These are muscles, right?
Yes. Amêijoas in Portuguese. You put it here with your hand, no problem.
I usually just eat them straight away before they get in.
Yeah. And you put it like that. Would you do this?
I can manage that, I think.
While you explain me why not raising consumption?
Well, I think the muscles are a good analogy, you see. The Keynesians are saying that what we need is some more liquid and juice to make this work better, and then capitalism will work if that bowl of muscles is capitalism. I'm saying that if you keep eating the muscles, profits go down, and if profits are down because we have a capitalist system, that's what causes a crisis and a crash. Lack of profit rather than lack of demand. So the only way that capitalists can get out of the crisis is by driving down the costs for them. That means the cost of labour, people's wages and their jobs, but also the costs of old equipment and factories, infrastructure which is no longer profitable. They want to wipe that out or sell it off, reduce it, so that the remaining capitalists can then have a higher rate of profit and we can start the process again. But just think, Raquel, it just goes up and then down and then up. That's the way it goes. So the Keynesians can't solve it just by simply expecting to sort of lubricate the wheels of capitalism more effectively.
What you are saying is that the value theory of Marx is still the, let's say, gravity law of capitalism. Would you?
Well, yes, I think that Marx says that. Look, what the key to the understanding of our economies are that we don't get anything produced, even these muscles from the sea, or cooking, unless human beings expend time and energy, labour.
So, if there were machines here doing this instead of both, wouldn't
somebody has to make the machines. Somebody
this
has to
wouldn't
design
make
them.
Profit?
Well, it would probably reduce the profit, because as the amount of human labour is reduced in time relative to all the spending they're making on robots and other machines to replace it, whether it's washing machines to replace the fact that we used to scrub away. That process helps us all by getting the washing done more quickly, or if we had a machine to do what you're doing now, that would get the muscles opened up more quickly, but it would also reduce the amount of labour that is being employed. And in a capitalist economy, to sell on the market, that means that their profit relative to their costs would tend to fall. This is one of Marx's laws about economics. So there's a pressure on the profitability of an economy as automation and as machinery are introduced. So actually, before you'd ever get to the position of robots doing muscles for us, we'd have a series of other recessions like the next one, as I'm expecting.
We go back to this question of automation, which is, if you allowed me, the key one of the key centers of this interview. I would just now explain to the people that are seeing us at home what are we doing. This is coriander and garlic.
Lovely.
And we do it in a nice olive oil. And then we will join the mussels. They were here just to open. They were here 5 minutes without water.
Yeah.
So we are just using the water they have.
Uh-huh.
And they open. If they don't open completely, don't eat it, because this means they are not okay. Then we divide, let's say, half. Half we still leave the...
All right.
Half we still leave the...
in the shell.
In the shell, thank you so much for aiding me. And then we'll add this with some white wine. And then it's ready. This is called amêijoas à bolhão pato. Tá bom.
This isn't any small crab, this is a
No,
big crab.
this is a big crab, sapateira in Portuguese. We cook it, well, better you don't buy it frozen. You buy it fresh in the market, and it has to be heavy. If it's heavy, it means that the best of this crab, which is, I would say, something like the belly, it's full of...
meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's...
And you put it 5 to 10 minutes in water with salt, and you open like this. This one goes away.
Yeah.
And then I need some...
You're going to have a machine, are you?
No,
Just a knife.
You can do it like this.
Without cutting your fingers.
Yes, let's hope. I have cut it lots of times. It's the risk of cooking, no problem. So we open like this.
Uh-huh.
It's absolutely delicious.
Fresh, look at that.
Yeah. And it's full of this. You take all
That's
of this.
That's the roe, is it?
Yeah.
What we call
We take all this.
the gut.
So you clean all this.
And
You
we
take
call
it.
this in England dressing the crab.
Yeah, really? That's... You take it
You take it out and then you put all the meat back in.
Yeah. And this one here, we throw away.
Yeah.
Oh, this is delicious. You put it all.
Oh.
This is very good. And these ones here, the grey
The side,
ones.
Yeah.
The grey ones
the key.
we throw away.
That's where they're poisoned.
We don't use it. Yeah. We throw it away in order to clean it.
Yeah.
So we leave it like this. So we have throw away these little things, which I don't know the word in English.
Bones.
And then we break it. And it goes. It goes
Some meat in there too.
to the table together with this.
Yeah.
And then we use this and we eat it by hand.
Alright. Like a
And it tastes like
Fruits
real
of the sea.
Yeah. And to do this, we can do it in several ways.
Yeah.
As it is with a lots of eggs, these are baby,
Yeah.
little babies.
Yeah. Well,
Let's not say it like this. It's
not
very
mammals.
dangerous.
No.
These are would be future
Eggs is more like.
Yeah, eggs of crab.
Yeah.
You can put it pickles, mustard,
Uh-huh.
egg, and mayonnaise.
Yes,
As
great.
we have a lot, this one was a very good one. I would advise just to put eggs, mayonnaise, and a little bit of mustard. We don't need the pickles because it's so
Rich already.
Yes, it's so rich already. And we shouldn't put too much mayonnaise and too much egg because otherwise it will taste just like...
mayonnaise. Then.
Yeah, let's have
This
it
crab
with
is
the-
quite a sensitive, delicate taste.
Yeah.
Although
So, now we have here some homemade mayonnaise, although it's bought it. Homemade, but
Homemade,
bought
is it? It's
Yeah.
homemade but bought or bought but homemade?
I've put this spoon, and now I will put a spoon of mustard. And then with a fork, 2 forks would be better.
We're going to mash it up.
We
Smash.
just smash
Smash
long
and mash.
time, and at the end will be a kind of a pate.
Yeah.
Delicious. We put in bread.
Yeah.
Should be a homemade bread in the oven,
Yeah.
because if you toast toast it in the oven will be tastier.
I'm getting hungry already.
This is delicious. I shall tell you that the Portuguese, even the poor Portuguese, used to eat more fish in the beginning of the 20th century than the rich people.
Yeah.
And nowadays is exactly the opposite.
It's a shame.
The Portuguese almost don't have access to fresh fish.
Yeah.
And they say it's because there is lack of it. But what we say is that a huge part is exported to
Right.
richer countries,
Yeah.
so it's more profitable to sell it to
Abroad.
richer countries abroad.
Yeah.
And they say this is a good way because we are going out of the crisis with this export policy. What do you think about this?
Well, everybody has to export, but clearly, if you've got produce at home, which people could eat, and it's part of the tradition of everyday life in Portugal, it's a big shame that people cannot get hold of that, and at a reasonable price. I suppose in the old times they used to fish it themselves almost in the local villages, but now of course it goes through the big supermarkets and the big food chains, and they control the price of these goods, and they make sure the distribution is also abroad.
And they have laws to forbid the local communities to fish because they say it's for ecological reasons, but just 1% of what is catch in the sea is done by local communities. 99 is by big
Indeed,
big
that's the same with pollution.
ships.
They say you should, you must separate your waste, household waste, recycle it, and that to make things better. But the biggest polluters are the big industries and companies that are belching out smoke rather than the households.
They are generalizing the so-called green economy. There is a huge amount of subsidies to companies to restructuring their products into green products.
Yes.
Ships, mobile industry, electricity. What do you think about this? Using taxes of the public sector to this so-called green economy?
I think the solution to pollution, climate change and global warming and stopping the carbon emissions and other sorts of gases that are getting into the air can't really be solved by taxes and control of prices. The only way it's going to be solved is that the big combines and industries which are creating this are publicly controlled and owned, so that we can direct their usage in the most ecological way and expand the environmentally safe sorts of industries, renewals projects, wind power, solar power and so on. While at the moment we still have, only this week it was that Donald Trump's announced that he wants to allow the coal industry in America to expand again and not to meet the emission targets. That shows that while coal industry is still in the private hands and used just to make profit, you can never get control of carbon emissions. Taxing them is not going to solve it.
Do you want to taste it?
Oh, yeah.
If you die, we shouldn't eat it.
No, all right. It's delicious.
Great. Lots of people say that Marx was wrong because he didn't predict the middle classes.
Right, yes. He says
What do you think about this?
back in the 19th century, he said that there were basically going to be two classes under modern society. The capitalist class, namely the people that own all the factories and businesses and everything, and wealth and property, and the rest of us who have to work for a living. And that there would be no small proprietors like peasants on the farms, and farmers would disappear. And there'd just be big cities with everybody working, or most people working, and the other people owning everything. Now, people say, well, that's not what happened because we don't have workers in big factories anymore, or in docks and so on, and we still have some small businesses, and people actually even work at home and all the rest of it. So that means that these two big classes no longer exist. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think we would say that you just have to ask yourself, how many people do you know that don't have to go and do some sort of work in order to make a living and provide for themselves and for their families if they're doing that as well? There's hardly anybody who's in that position. Only a very, very tiny number, maybe 0.1%.
Varela.
We are not now going to the sitting room and start eating.
That's what I want to do.
So now I'm going to be evaluated by you.
Oh yeah, we'll find out.
Which is a pleasure.
How many marks out of 10 do you want? We'll do it out of 10.
Okay.
It looks already 10 out of 10.
Let's say we just do evaluation at the end of the game, as
Okay.
you say. If you were a dock worker and you're threat to be dismissed because there will be an automatic crane doing your job, what would you do today?
Well, I think all the dock workers have got to protect their jobs because they have a living to make, and their wives are working too, and people have to make a living and they have to bring up their families. They can't lose their jobs, so they must defend their jobs. The question is, how are we going to do that? Now, there are different ways of doing it. You can say we refuse to have any possibility of automatic cranes and other equipment. You refuse to do it, and that's the end of it. Or you can just say, well, okay, if it's better technology, it's more efficient, we introduce it, but you lose your job. There must be some way in between that. And it seems to me that the answer would be that dock workers should hope for, in return for introducing such cranes, that the level of employment remains, but people perhaps work less hours. They don't have to put in 40 hours or 50 hours. They can put in less hours and still receive the same level of income. Why should they not participate in the profits and gains made from the new technology, which will presumably make more profits for the company that employs them? That those profits should be shared through a reduction in hours and better wages, or the maintenance of the existing wages for the existing workforce. What happens most of the time with new productivity and new technology is that all the gains of the productivity go to the owners of the company that's bringing it in, and nothing to the workers, who often lose their jobs. And there is a way forward for dock workers and others faced with technology. I find this, we have the big thing in the UK at the moment, that the rail drivers are being asked to introduce driverless trains. There will be no drivers anymore eventually. The trains will just go up and down the track without drivers, and you will have just signal personnel keeping an eye on things, and it's all automatic. Drivers can say, well, we were not going to accept driverless trains if it means we all lose our jobs and have no income. But if driverless trains come in and we can be trained to do signal work, maybe for less hours but still the same money, and then we participate in the gains of that productivity, then the technology can help the passengers in trains and the customers of the docks to receive better and quicker service without the loss of salaries and employment for the people doing it. We shouldn't be in a position where all these big companies are really deciding the introduction of automation and other technology, robots down the road to replace human labour, and that all the gains of that will go to the private profit of big companies. What we really need is a common owned system of the big industries and services in an economy, so that we can plan the hours involved and the introduction of that technology so that it benefits everybody. If we have a predominantly publicly owned economy, then things are produced for what people need and their services, and also the hours being worked will be decided democratically by the people involved. At the moment, a small number of people who run the boards of these big companies, looking at international profit, whether it's to buy or sell companies or close them down across the globe, they decide whether we have jobs and how many hours we work and what our wages are. That employ us and sell these goods and services on the market get a profit, otherwise they don't happen. But that's a really wasteful and unjust way of doing things. A much more efficient way of doing things would be to plan to meet the needs of people. At the moment, companies produce things often that we don't need. Do we need arms? Do we need luxury cars? Do we need yachts? We don't need these things, the majority of us. What we do need is good public transport, good health services, good education and schools. These things, these public goods, as sometimes they're called in economics, these public goods could be provided by a commonly owned production and by using the resources of the whole economy and people's needs, and therefore the profit motive can be withdrawn from the process of production.
But that's socialism, and in socialism people lose their freedom and their opportunity to innovate and be more clever, as it happens in Soviet Union.
Well, yes, I mean there are two things there. Has innovation come about because of the fantastic efforts of companies like the big private companies? There's quite a lot of research that shows that actually innovation comes through the ingenuity of individuals and people working together, teams of engineers and so on, come up with new ideas and new thoughts. Not the companies. not the big companies. In fact, if you take the big companies like Apple, that we all consider as a great, produce great products, our phones and our tablets and our computers and so on, well, many people think these are marvellous. These haven't been produced because of the profit-seeking drive of competition of the owners of Apple. The original ideas of the software and even the hardware came from public money being used by governments to produce certain things, mainly for military originally. They were public ideas coming from the common use of engineers, not thinking about profit, but thinking about what would be the best way to do something. It's the same with drugs. A lot of the best drugs were produced in university research departments and other institutions that are publicly owned and publicly funded, not by the big pharmaceutical companies who took them over and marketed them, and often used their research scientists to produce sorts of drugs that we don't really need compared to what the majority would need. So there's a distortion here, but people are under the illusion that competitive companies produce innovation. That's not the case. They produce what they think will make a profit. It's not always the best. The Soviet Union is an example. Well, it's an experiment, if you like, which clearly failed. It didn't base itself upon the democratic decisions of the population to decide what to do. We can go into the history of the Soviet Union, but we don't have that time over lunch. But that's not an example, it seems to me, or proof that we can't operate through using the planning of the resources of people democratically to decide what are the best things to produce, where we should present our resources, rather than a small minority of big companies around the world that do that now.
Would you say that this is unavoidable, that when a sector goes to power, you will protect themselves and their interest against the majority of the population? It doesn't matter the class origin. Do you believe this?
Well, I think there's always a danger. I mean, if you and I and the majority of people are working very long hours and they've got their families to look after, and there's a lot of stress at work, you don't have much time to think about the big political issues or even the small ones that concern your own workplace. And so those people who are in the positions of power to make decisions find that they have to make the decisions on their own, and there's a risk that they will make the decisions in their own perhaps small-minded bureaucratic interests rather than the majority of the population. So the fullest possible democracy is necessary to decide things from the bottom up, in communities, in workplaces, in other institutions, in order to ensure that the checks and controls on the people that we've elected or appointed to do things, we have check and control that they are doing it in our interests. There will be a continual tension there. I mean, we all make mistakes. Even the best economy that was being the interest, we make mistakes. Perhaps we build the airport in the wrong place, or we do something else.
Would you agree with me if I say that in Soviet Union it would be unavoidable a dictatorship because socialism is not possible with such a underdeveloped of the productive forces. For the ones that are hearing us at home, if you produce so less that is not enough for the majority or for the entire society, because you don't have machines, knowledge, you have the country destroyed, then it is impossible to have socialism, because socialism is social abundancia. How do you say this?
Of abundance.
Socialism is about abundance.
Yes, it's about producing way more than to meet all the needs as much as we can see them. And it's possible, technically now, on a global scale, to use the technology we have in the world to create enough food, to use the resources sustainably and environmentally carefully in order to meet all the needs that we have. None of those things happen now because the world is divided into competing nations and competing companies. On a world scale, it is possible for us to do that. In the case of the Soviet Union, here is a government that came up to power in a revolution, but it was isolated in a very backward country where 80% of the population was still in the countryside on the farms. And they weren't able to do anything much more than they could with their available resources. We see recently with the death of Fidel Castro, there's a very tiny country, very small island economy, which was isolated and boycotted and invaded by the Americans. It's not possible for that to develop a fully socialist democracy which meets the needs of all the Cuban people when it's so isolated. It has to be a combination of the big economies in the world coming together.
So you wouldn't
Yeah.
agree with the idea of the communist parties that say that dictatorships were what was possible?
Yeah, it was necessary, or it was inevitable. I think it's probably inevitable in the sense that if you're isolated like that, then and you can't produce a society of superabundance, you can't allow people to have the time to participate democratically, then it becomes inevitable that the small people who are originally in power begin to control that power for themselves and against the interests of the majority. That's always a risk. I don't think we can justify that. That's the difference. That may be what happened. We wouldn't want necessarily the gains of the Soviet Union and of a planned economy, of taking industry forward, providing jobs, and taking living standards up. We only have to look at the Chinese revolution that has led to massive increase in the living standards in China, particularly since the 1970s with the opening up of China to the world markets, and they've expanded dramatically. But the Chinese elite controls that. There is no democracy. People who dissent get thrown in jail, tortured and executed. That went on in the Soviet Union and in China and in Cuba. These places can't deliver democracy along with the improved economic conditions. We can only do that if we combine the world's resources and provide the democracy to go with it, and that means people having more time and energy to participate democratically. And
so let me go back to reducing of working time hours, maintaining the living standards.
Yeah.
What is this idea of, because this is full employment idea of the 70s that was abandoned by social democracy and even social democratic and Christian.
Well, I don't think, Raquel, we ever really had full employment. If I remember it when I was very young, which must have been a very long time ago, when I left school and college, you could get a job very easily in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't a problem. And people had the idea that the jobs wasn't the most important thing. Perhaps doing something useful in life was important. But that was a very brief time, a short generation. The majority of time throughout the whole of the history of capitalism for the last 200 years has not been one of full employment. It's been of people struggling to keep their jobs with the ups and downs of the booms and slumps that we were talking about before when you were cooking up this great meal here, that there's never been a period of really full employment except very briefly, and there isn't now. And that's the condition, normal condition of capitalism. There isn't full employment. So continually workers are faced with at their workplace with the issue of whether they can maintain their jobs, whether they can maintain a decent wage for it, and whether they're going to lose their jobs because some new machine comes in to replace them completely. And as you were saying earlier, unless they can control their work and control the decisions made about that, then they are continually in jeopardy of losing their jobs and losing their living standards.
Do you think that automation is efficient? Because dock workers argue, and in fact I've coordinated with a colleague, Eric Silveira, this study on automation. What we realize is that in most of the cases, especially when we are speaking about old ports, introducing full automatic crane, diminishing productivity, but it cuts more jobs, so it raises the profit.
So,
do you see this in other sectors where technology is not raising production but is raising profitability?
Well, I think under modern economies, capitalist economies, where private companies control decisions, they make these decisions on whether they can increase the profit. They're not particularly interested in increasing the efficiency of a company in the sense of getting things done more quickly so that we could get more produce done more quickly and people could spend less time doing them. They're more the thing that matters for them is there a profit in it. If there's not a profit in it, they won't introduce the technology.
So for you, it's not strange that we have concluded that essentially it's about cutting jobs and breaking unions' power. It's not about raising production.
Cutting jobs and breaking unions' power leads to higher profit is the idea, and that's what's. The whole system is motivated on the question of increasing the profit of the company so that the shareholders get a dividend and the managers of the company get their bonuses and their big salaries. And that if investment in a new technology works to do that, then they will do that. And if workers object, then you need to break their ability to organise against it. There's continual battle in the workplaces between the people working in them and the people owning them about how that company should be run.
But do you think that in near future, fully automatized cranes will be much more productive than workers?
Well, I'm no expert about cranes and dockers, but I mean, there are lots of other examples. You could say that if we had, I think the more importantly is whether the transport and logistics systems that we have around the world are efficient in producing things more quickly in less time, so that people spend less man hours doing them, and that will create the position where you get, if we maintain wages and the employment of workers and their hours, they get less, they have to work less hours for the same money. The total surplus or the extra value created by this, that decides the issue. Who controls this extra value? Is it just going to be in the hands of the companies to decide whether they wish to invest in wherever they want to do and take workers' wages down? Or is it going to be in the hand of the whole workforce and democratically in planning the whole of the economy by people's democratic decisions, how we use all those extra technologies which can increase efficiency? By what we mean by increasing efficiency is lowering the hours that we have to spend producing the same amount or producing more in the same time, not making a profit. There's a conflict in the current modern society between making a profit and increasing productivity. They're not the same things. Many people confuse that. They think increased profit means increased productivity, or increased productivity means increased profit. No, it depends on...
This idea?
Well, the difference between is that an increase in production or reducing the hours taken to produce the same amount is an increase in productivity. The sharing out of those gains between people's wages and salaries and profits is the different struggle. It's a struggle between two groups of people. One group that has to work for a living and the other group that owns the means of production and all the property and machinery. That battle will decide how much profit is, not the productivity. And at the moment we have a system where if the profits don't go up, then we won't introduce it, and we'll only introduce it if the profits go up, and that means often trying to reduce people's wages so that they gain nothing from the increased productivity. I can tell you, Raquel, tell your viewers that there's a very good graph which shows what's happened in the last 30 years of productivity in the US going up, if you like, in an angled line, and the wages for a majority of workers in America just going flat. So there's a gap between the productivity and wages, and that means there's been a big increase in profits and inequality in the United States. And that's the sort of society that continually operates, particularly in big economies like the United States.
I have a last question, but I want to make you I hope not such a bad translation of a poem that, of a music that became a fado. It's about having time to live, having time to be human, having time for what we're doing here. We are also celebrating.
This is our moment of freedom from stress and toil over lunch on a Sunday, but it doesn't happen that often for many people.
It's from Ana Moura. It calls day off.
Day off, yeah.
Day off. And she writes, in this day there is no hurry with this invincible side. Invincible, how do you say this in English? I look invincible.
Yeah.
In this day, I will start. In this day, I don't have to look invincible with a nice dress, high heel, nice makeup. I am going to go out to the street. Maybe the traffic will stop to watch me. The police is having fun. The fiscal, the tax
collector
is not going to pay a fine. Is not going to.
Oh yeah, the parking person, is it?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Will not
make a fine. Yeah.
The tax collector will not make a fine. I walk, and the tourist is not bothering me. Dona Laura, Miss Laura, today is going to read the newspaper, and in the kitchen the husband is cooking.
Quite right.
I would like to ask you about this fado in this very special sense. Why we work for live or we live for work?
Yeah.
What is our human side in this production? How do we...
Well, Raquel, I'd like to, I don't know what it would be in Portuguese, but in English there's a difference between work and toil. Toil is when you are forced under stress to continually produce something, do a service because you have to make a living and your boss is telling you to do so. And then there's work, things that you want to do. Nobody wants to do nothing. People want to do things, create things, whether it's cooking, or whether it's painting, or whether it's being on the computer and doing something interesting, or whether it's doing a run and marathon. This morning on Sunday, as I come to your place, I see people running up, doing the marathon, doing things on their day off. We should have that time to express ourselves in many different ways, whether it's through art, whether it's through physical activity, whether it's through mental activity. And most of us don't have time to that. Most of us spend toil. We're toiling to make a living, to keep things together, keep our families together, and not having the time to really develop ourselves as human beings.
But we have to continue to working and do some hard works even in a socialist society.
Yes, hard work, work, which means something that actually contributes to society, because people want to contribute to society. They want to help each other. They want to do things which will improve society and things for themselves, and they want to express themselves. So that's what I mean by work. Toil, where you're just trying to keep your living standards going so that your boss can meet his targets and get the profit for the company, is not what we need.
Thank you so much, Michael. Shall we do a toast?
Cheers. Forward to the future.
To the future of equality
Equality.
and freedom.
Yes, exactly.
Equality and freedom.
And less toil.